All right, everyone, welcome to how to create a great GPS webinar. My name is Jeff Woods. I run the company behind The One Thing. This is a webinar that came up because we did a training for some of our coaches on how to create a GPS and a 411 at the highest level. And the feedback that we got from that was huge. And so many of the coaches came up to us and said, hey, now I got to go train my clients on this, that I thought, instead of having hundreds of people going out and training, why not have one webinar where we can give you the information that we gave all of your coaches. So to give you a little bit of background, we're having this conversation because we're in the business of time. Every year we set goals with our coach, and yet we struggle to have a relationship with them. Here's what we mean by this. While we have a sense of the result that we want to achieve by the end of the year, do we always know the specific thing that if we just did that today, it would automatically put us on track for our goals? We don't. And if you think about dating as an example, think about a time. How many of you have ever been in a committed relationship before? If so, put me in the questions box. Okay, perfect. So I want you to think back to the end of the first date. You were so excited, and you're probably in your mind, you're thinking, wow, this is something I want to focus on. You made it a goal. And over the course of the next week, you're asking the question, what can I do so that we can grow closer together? Maybe I move from first to second base. That would be awesome. And each incremental week, you are focusing very specifically on how you had to behave to move toward your long-term goal. And when that relationship started to go off the course, when there was tension, when there was frustration, you bet you narrowed your focus and you were going, how do I have to change my activities so that we can get and grow closer together? We're great at doing this with our personal relationships, yet we don't do that with our goals. With our goals, we set it and then we don't revisit it until much, much, much later. And oftentimes it's way too late for us to even make up the gap. Folks, the world does not need a new way to set goals. They need a way to have a relationship with them. That is what we do in the company behind The One Thing. For the last 4 years, we have been figuring out how do we help an individual, a team, or an entire organization live the surprisingly simple truth behind extraordinary results. The last year specifically, we have been going into major corporations. We're talking Fortune 50, some of the most notable companies in the world. They have brought us in specifically because they had some challenges. And I want you to put in the chat box or in the questions box if any of these resonate with you. Have any of you ever questioned where the organization was going? If so, put a number 1 in the questions box. Have any of you ever questioned what your specific piece of the overall business plan was that you were truly accountable for? If so, put a number 2 in the questions box. How many of you have ever experienced mid-year there's a shift in priorities and you're not clear where you should be focusing? If so, put a 3 in the questions box. How many of you have ever realized that no one succeeds alone and you might have a one thing and someone else has a one thing? You need each other to succeed, yet your one thing's not their one thing. And you lack alignment. If so, put a number 4. Yeah, I'm seeing them all come in. Folks, you are the exact same as every company that we have worked with. And that's why they have brought us in. And guess what? There are a set of tools that have been given to all of us that frankly we've undervalued. We have grossly undervalued the tools that have been laid right before us. Those tools are the GPS and the 411. What if I told you that there was a tool that could guarantee that every single person on the team knew where the business was going? They had clarity on what piece of the business they were responsible for. They knew what to do when priorities shifted so that they could act in order of priority. And when their one thing wasn't someone else's one thing, they knew how to have a conversation so that they could succeed together. What would be possible? Put your answers in the questions box. Anything is possible. And for those of you that are wondering, how does this all line up? Folks, that one tool is the GPS. The GPS is a tool that ensures that people know where the business is going. You know what each person, what piece of the business they own, what to do when priorities change, and how to gain alignment when your one thing is not someone else's one thing. How many of you are realizing How many of you believe now that you know that this tool can do all of that, how many of you believe you have an opportunity to do even better with your one-page business plan? We all do. So let's talk about what a GPS is. A GPS is a one-page business plan. GPS, it stands for goal, priorities, and strategies. And just like the GPS on your phone, it gets you to where you want to go. There's a reason that we call it a one-page business plan. That's because it's really tough to be on the same page if your plan literally doesn't fit on the same page. This model forces you to stop treating like everything matters equally and requires that you narrow your focus down to the things that matter most, the 20% that's going to generate 80% of your results. And I'm curious, how many of you have ever done a GPS before? If so, put GPS in the questions box, and if not, do a question mark for me, because I'm literally going to be customizing this on the fly to you. Okay, so we're a little bit split. Awesome. So let's talk about who needs a GPS. You need a GPS. How many of you are leaders? If so, put a number 1. If you do not have direct reports, put a number 2. Okay, if you have direct reports, no ifs, no ands, no buts, you need a GPS. If you do not have direct reports, yet you are starting up your own business, we would still suggest you use a GPS. If you're an individual contributor inside a team, you may not need a GPS. You could go straight to a 411, which will be the topic of the follow-up webinar we're going to do on December 4th at 3 p.m. So write that down. December 4th, 3 p.m. will be how to create a great 411. Okay, so this is good information for. So goal, priority, and strategy. This is just a model for breaking a really big goal down into a series of priorities and strategies, initiatives and steps, so that you can understand how you're doing throughout the year. So what I'm going to share with you today is based on the information of us going into these companies and having firsthand experience of literally facilitating the workshop where you create a GPS. And this could be, we've done it for teams of 5 people to teams of over 100. So it absolutely scales. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you. And folks, this is your webinar, so please interact. I've got Jeannie on here as well, and if she'll be managing the chat box, so if she sees specific questions, she can unmute herself and then share it as well. So give me a second, show screen 3. Okay, if you can see my screen, put yes in the questions box. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And Jeannie, okay, very good. Okay, so let's first and foremost take a look at the basic template. So it starts by identifying what your one thing is for the year, that overarching goal. And once we establish the goal, we then earn the right to ask the question, what are the major priorities? These are the big initiatives, folks. These are not the specific tactical things that you're gonna do. Once you identify the priorities and they are listed in order of priority, we then earn the right to identify the strategies that support each priority. So that's the really high level of it. Now, and if you want, yes, if you want to get this template, let me just show you where to get that specifically. If you go to theonething.com, that's with the number 1 in the URL, and you go under the free stuff column, free stuff, you'll see the template on that page. So I'm going to walk you through step by step how to actually facilitate this. Like Brock just asked, would team members follow our team GPS, or do they need individual GPSs to support? So we'll get to that. Okay, perfect. So first thing you need to know, where do you think we begin? When we are facilitating and creating a GPS for our team or for our organization, where do we start? Put your answer in the questions box. The goal, absolutely, the goal. Now, let me tell you, this is going to be the common pitfall that people fall into. Any of you analytical? If so, put me in the questions box. Yeah, analytical people have a tendency to want to dive into the weeds. And honestly, it's something that makes you great. You see those details, you obsess over them, and it's fantastic. Yet what we have experienced when we're facilitating these is we're having a conversation about what our goal is for the year. And when we're massaging the wording around the goal, somebody will go, well, how does that affect priority, that little thing down here? As a leader, when you are facilitating a GPS, you have to draw a line in the sand. You do not earn the right to talk about anything else until you are clear on where you are going. Here's why this matters. When Gary and Jay wrote The One Thing, there was a lie that got cut from the book, did not make it to print. Do you know what that, how many of you know what that lie might be? Put the answer in the questions box. The lie of the low-hanging fruit. The low-hanging fruit is a lie. How many of you have ever looked at all the things in front of you and you see that low-hanging fruit, you see that deal that you could get and you go, oh, it's easy money, and you go after it and it feels like a success? My hand goes up. The low-hanging fruit is a lie, because if you and I are right here and our goal is to get here, we may have something that pops up that's really shiny right here, and we could go and get it, but it would take us in the opposite direction of where we actually want to go in the long run. What we see happening in organizations all the time, and I saw this happen inside of a large organization I can't share the name of, but the president walked in and literally said to all the department heads, we have a challenge. All of you have gotten clarity on what you think are the things that you want to be doing with your team, and you're trying to figure out how our vision for the organization supports you doing those things, and it's backwards. We have cast a vision for where we are going as an organization. It's your job to come up with specific priorities and strategies that support this happening. Folks, when you just look at all the stuff that's on your plate and say, how do we cram this into a goal? You do not know the difference from a priority from a distraction. That's why it starts with the goal. So first and foremost, we have to determine the goal. Here is a great question that you can start with. So when we want to start by establishing our goal, here's a question you can ask. Start by asking, fast forward to the end of the year. How will you know if you're successful? This Friday, I'm going to be sitting down with my team to do our GPS for the year. And we are literally going to start by every single person on my team, me posing this question. Every single one of them is going to have a series of sticky notes, and they're just going to start going to town. One idea per sticky note, one idea per sticky note. Everybody individually coming up with their own ideas, then collectively as a group, we can surface them. And we do it that reason very specifically for a reason. Because if you just say, what ideas do you have? And you open it up to the group, who's going to talk? The loudest, most dominant people. Does that mean that they have the best answers? No, 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 no. So it starts by asking the question to your team. And here's another thing that you may or may not have picked up on. Did I say that we established the goal in a vacuum, that we walked into our office and created the goal and handed it to our team? I enlisted the support of the team. Why does that matter? Buy-in. You all nailed it. Something to be aware of. GPS is not a democracy. It's not like you get your team into a room and say, what do you all think the goal is, and take a vote. The purpose as the leader is to invite the conversation from your people. So you, as a leader, you can have as much insight as possible to make an informed decision. A few weeks ago, I was facilitating this for a pretty large company, and the leader asked the question, and for a solid hour, people were sharing ideas and throwing things up, and it started to get a little bit heated. People weren't agreeing. And I said, here's the good news. You don't have to agree. And then I looked to the leader and said, you have enough information. Tell us where you're going. And he was able to say, based on everything you said, I believe this is the goal. So I want you to hear a few things. Number one, enlist the buy-in from your people. Number two, start by asking a question like, fast forward to the end of the year, how will you know if you're successful? And number three, this is not a democracy. Take in the information, and based on the information you have as a leader, declare what the goal is. Now, there are three things that we want you to look for to ensure that it is a good goal, that your goal is accountable. If at all possible, please make it as specific, as measurable, and as simple as possible. Write those down. Specific, measurable, simple. What type of business are you in? Put your industry in the questions box, because that's going to give me a sense of what we're working with. So gutter cleaning, real estate, coaching and training. Hey, Sue. RNF, web design, online marketing, making money. Mandy, you're funny. I like you. Skincare. Okay, so for a lot of the people on here, your goal may be easy to come up with a number. How much revenue or how much profit do you want to have? Yet I'll give you a completely different example. When we work with IT divisions inside of companies, it's not like they're going to say, we're going to create 31 software programs this year. If your goal cannot be specific and measurable, it must be directional. So write that down. If it can't be specific and measurable, it must be directional. Hey, Jeannie, go ahead and mute yourself, and you can take yourself off mute if you want to comment. Here's why that matters. We asked, how many of you have ever questioned where the organization is going? This solves that. If your goal is specific and measurable and simple, if you stop somebody in a hallway and say, what's our goal this year? They go, easy, 250 in profit. Or if it can't be specific and measurable, if it needs to be directional, I'll make up an example around IT. Our goal is to create software that mitigates risk and sets the company up for double-digit growth. It's got to be simple enough that every single person in your organization can know what the goal is and rattle it off. Why does this matter? Put your answers in the questions box. Why do you think this matters? I see clarity, same page, buy-in, alignment, mindset. Gary Keller would suggest to you that the purpose of a goal is to be appropriate in the moment. To be appropriate in the moment. The world does not need a new way to set goals, folks. They need a way to have a relationship with them. Every single person on your team has to easily remember where they are going, where you are going as a team, so that they can look back on what they are doing today and ask, is what I am doing lined up with us hitting our profit goal, or lined up with us creating software that mitigates risk, that sets the company up for double-digit growth? Or is it a distraction? Let's pause here. Out of everything we have covered so far, and we've just gotten to the goal, what's one thing you learned so far that you can put into action immediately? Put your answers in the questions box. Chris asked, does the business one goal have to be profit? The answer is no, it does not have to be. Yeah, and for those of you that are asking about that other page, don't worry, we'll get it to you. Gina says, this is not a democracy. Nakia, hey Nakia, says that keep it simple. Simplify the process, being specific with the goal, sticky notes with ideas. Oh yeah, sticky notes are your friends. Create team buy-in by allowing participants in the goal setting. Weed through the priorities. If it's not simple, measurable, or specific, it must be directional. And if it's directional, it should be specific too. Simplify the goal. There you go, folks. That's fantastic. So that's just to get to the goal. Now, from a time management standpoint, I will tell you from our experience, just facilitating the conversation around what the goal is can take anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes. Just a heads up, okay? So that'll help you. Let me show you. Once we establish our goal for the year, let me give you a good coaching question. This is a good one. Once you think you have your goal, here's the Trump one to make sure you have the right goal. Ask yourself, could you still achieve this goal and fail for the year? Could you still hit the goal and actually fail? Let me give you an example. I've seen somebody say, I want to do $1 million in revenue. And they came up with that and we said, awesome. Can you still hit that goal and fail? And they looked at us really strange. And I said, can you hit that goal and still fail? And they went, well, yeah, we could not make a profit and go out of business. I went, oh, so based on that, what changes do you need to make? And they said, it's actually a profit number. So that will just get you to the goal. Once we've identified the goal, we have now earned the right to identify the priorities that would make achieving that goal possible. Now, let me give you some pro tips. Again, same thing here. I would suggest, this is what we do inside of these companies, sticky notes, and ask, what do you think are the major priorities we need to consider this year in order to achieve this goal? And each person writes down one priority per sticky note. Boom, 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 boom. And then once every person has gotten all their ideas down on paper, you then get to bring them together and see what are the high level themes. So I can tell with you, my team we've already started to float some of these ideas around. We've been having conversations about what the goal might be and the priorities for a few months now. But growth, retention, operational stability, people, these are big, high level priorities. They're not the specific strategies. You come up with all of the priorities, and then what's the next step? You rank them in order of priority. Meaning if you could only achieve one thing, is it really this? Should you earn the right to achieve a second? Is it this? Should you earn the right to achieve another? Is it this? Out of curiosity, how many of you have heard my GPS story with Gary in my first 90 days? If so, put me, if not, do a question mark. Okay, wow, most people haven't. So I learned this the hard way. In my first 90 days, I had to create a business plan for our business behind the one thing. And I came up with my GPS, and we had a state of the company meeting. It was Gary, Jay, and myself. And I handed each of them a copy of my GPS. At the top was our big goal for the year. I then had 3 big priorities. We started talking about priority number 1 because it was first. Gary and Jay asked a bunch of questions. I answered them. I asked, are we good? They said, yeah. So I went and I started talking about number 2. And pretty soon, Gary started asking more questions about number 1. And I remember not thinking anything of it. I just answered the questions. I asked, are we good? They said, yep. So I answered their questions and went back to number 2. Finished up 2, started talking about number 3, and Gary went back to number 1. And for all of you who have seen Meet the Parents and understand what the circle of trust is, I felt like I was over here because I couldn't understand why Gary kept going back to number 1. But I did the best I could. I just answered the questions. Are we good, GK? He said, yeah. I went back to number 3, and after about 10 seconds, he just stopped me. And he asked a series of questions that truly changed the way I view time. He asked, Jeff, do you need to accomplish number 3 in order to accomplish number 2? I said, no. He said, do you need to accomplish number 2 in order to accomplish number 1? I said, no. He said, then do me a favor. Just draw a line between number 1 and number 2, or even better, rip the page in half. And he literally stood there while I took my paper and ripped it in half. And then he said, don't even think about number 2 or number 3 until you've earned the right to by mastering number 1. Don't even think about number 2 or number 3 until you've earned the right to by mastering number 1. Folks, the reason that this changed the way I view time is because I realized my entire life I felt trapped to the number 1 lie of productivity. I treated everything like it mattered equally. Because these were all on here, I told myself it was only me. There was no other company. It was just Jeff. I told myself I had to move the ball a little bit on priority number 1, and then move the ball a little bit on priority number 2, and then move it a little bit on priority number 3. But I wasn't actually driving any one thing all the way to the finish line. Now, for those of you that said that you are not a part of a team, that if you are an individual who needs to have a GPS, yes, you are going to own all of these priorities. But once you declare your priorities, here's the pro tip. You put the name of who is responsible for that priority next to it. And that is a game changer. Because when you can very clearly assign, we already said, this ensures everybody knows where the organization is going. This ensures that Kaylin knows that she owns this piece of the business, and that is her one thing. Tony owns this piece of the business. That is his one thing. I own this piece of the business, and that is my one thing. How many of you have done a GPS in the past and have not ever been taught to put a name next to a priority or a strategy? Now, Brock asked a great question, which is, are you saying that all the priorities have to be connected? They do not. But there might be multiple things going on. Like I can tell you for next year when we're looking, people might be number one, retention might be number two, and growth might be number three. They're kind of connected, but they don't have to be connected. So, and they say, if this is the case, how do you get the priorities in order of priority? Wonderful question. Rank your priorities in order of priority. If you could only accomplish one, what's the one that would make achieving your goal easier or unnecessary? Should you earn the right to accomplish a second, which would it be? Should you earn the right to accomplish a third, which would it be? And re-rank so your priorities are in order of priority. Leslie asks, can the same name be next to more than just one priority? Also, can a name only be next to a strategy but not the entire priority? The answer is yes to all the above. Rodrigo, we can have more than one GPS. Is that the case with the priority? You can, but what I'm going to say is your org better start to get pretty big. I mean, I can tell you from a retention standpoint, our first strategy is going to be operational stability. And I know that that alone is going to require its own GPS that's going to get built out because there's a lot of stuff that falls under it. So I would just be really wary of GPSing yourself to death. Try to keep it simple. Lee asks, what if all three priorities add to the annual goal? So this has been a question that there's been two schools of thought on this, which is some people have been taught that each priority should be so powerful that it alone can accomplish the goal. That way you've got 3 at-bats to achieve your goal. And there's a lot of wisdom to that, and it's not always practical. If you're in the business that is more of a sales business, then you could come up with multiple priorities around each priority. Could be a type of lead generation initiative, and each of those could be so powerful that it hits your target for the year. But in most businesses, it does not necessarily work that way. So not each one has to be able to achieve the goal. Justin just asked, for multiple streams of income, do you have a GPS for each stream? You're getting in the weeds. I would ask you, is each stream that complex that it's going to require you to identify individual priorities and strategies? And if so, okay, but I would really challenge you to simplify if at all possible. If there is more than one GPS, then how are we focusing on the one? So this is a top-down type approach. So this is from the entire organization. And, for example, if Kaylin owns people, then Kaylin may need a GPS if it's a big enough company that, each of these strategies could become priorities, and each of these would have supporting strategies. So that's how it really starts to layer. This is what it looks like when you go inside of the Microsofts, the Apples of the world. If it's a small business, you probably don't need to go there yet unless you've really started to scale. So let's fly to 10,000 feet, because I can already see like all these questions that you're starting to ask that are super detailed and super nuanced are fantastic questions, and they're granular. So here's what I'm going to say about the one thing. You will never have a training on the one thing or any of our tools where you walk out with absolute clarity on all the answers. It's not possible. What you learn is how to ask a powerful coaching question and search for the answer. Your coach has asked you a great question when it's a question that's so big that you've gone, great question. And when you hit that wall called, I don't know, your coach went, well, if you did know the answer, what might it be? And you continue to search past that wall. Folks, so much of your journey with the one thing, like these questions about, well, if it's multiple streams of cash flow, what do I do here? I would challenge you to go internal and ask yourself that question and search for the answer. and based on that, put it into action, which will, you knock that domino down, it's going to set you up with some momentum to knock down the next one and the next one and the next one. This is a journey of asking great questions and searching for great answers, not having all the answers. Okay, flying up to 10,000 feet. We start by identifying the goal. We then identify the priorities. We then rank them in order of priority. And the final thing I'll mention on the priorities is we want them to be accountable. Specific, measurable, simple. And if it can't be specific and measurable, is at least directional. Are you seeing the theme here? So specific and measurable. Hire 20 people versus build our team. It'd be great if you knew exactly how many hires you had to make and you could make that specific and measurable. Or I can tell you one of our goals last year was 2,000 membership customers. That was our number one priority versus grow our recurring revenue. Both are fine. I would just challenge you to make it specific as possible. And I think for most of the businesses, based on the industries that you shared in the questions box, I think a lot of you can make it specific and measurable. It's when we get inside these large companies and you're working with marketing or you're working with IT and you're working with these big divisions that it's not always something that you can specify. Okay, let's pause. What questions do you have? Thank you for the comment, Samantha. I really appreciate that. Hey, Charlie. Charlie sent us a video of his 4-year-old daughter talking about the one thing. It was freaking cute. I'm going to have to share that. Any questions on this? Let's flip it. We've now covered half of our time together. What's your biggest aha that you've had so far? Put it in the questions box. Whew, Gina asked, how does one learn to think this big? Gina, it's a muscle. And there's a quote in the one thing from FM Alexander, people do not decide their futures. They decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures. I would ask the question, what's the habit that you could form, Gina, that if you formed it would make you think bigger? If the paparazzi was following you around with a camera for the last 90 days, how much time, how many minutes, or how many hours would we have actually seen you documented sitting down to ask a really big question and search for that answer, or to cast that big vision? Most people don't do that. It's why one of my favorite books, let me show you, The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. I think it was like episode 197, 198 of the One Thing podcast where we interviewed him. The episode is called The Habit That Cost $100 Million to Learn and Why It Was Worth It. Because this dude literally lost 100 mil and he learned one habit and he made way more than that much money back. That habit, thinking time. The habit of sitting down with a really big question and thinking about the answer. That's how you start to think big. So if we only work on priority one, are we still working on all the strategies at the same time? Alan, Alan, I'm flipping it on you. What do you think the answer is? What do you think the answer is? I'm going to look for your comment. How do we get buy-in if profit is the goal and it isn't that always the goal of the business? Great question, Eric. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Hey, Chris. Leverage. Yeah, leverage. It needs to be simple. That's right. That's why it's a one-page business plan, folks. It forces you to simplify your business or how you're going to go towards your goal. Ashley said that they have to be ranked. Absolutely. How much of a mind-blowing experience is that? Absolutely. Jody asked if I've got essentially 2 separate businesses, do I need to have 2 separate GPSs? You may want to. I mean, if Jay's across this wall right now, they're involved in so many different businesses. He probably has about 10 GPSs he carries around with him. It doesn't mean he does all the GPSs because he's got people who run those individual businesses. So he carries around with him though, so that when he's getting out of a meeting and he's wondering, what should I be doing right now? Instead of checking email, he will, I learned this from him. You grab your planner, and inside of it, you've got your 411, the 411s of your team, your GPS, your org chart, your standards, like all that gets carried around with you. Scott says it's a consistent journey in search of an answer. You bet. Not a democracy. Assign who to the priorities and strategies. Very nice. No, each person does not need a GPS. Folks, by the time you get down to individual contributors, all that's happening is once you're assigning names next to each of these, all this does is this tells me what goes on each person's 411. So I can tell you, like, when we look at our GPS for this year, my name only shows up on so many of those things. And then when I go to, come on, Jeff, where's your 411? Here, let me share my 411 with all of you. Let's go here. Resources. Boom. Here we go. Because then when I go to my 411, I know that the specific things that came from our GPS, like driving revenue, that's why there's lead generation for 200 hours, and you can see exactly how much time I've lead generated this year. For my GPS this year, priorities 1, 2, and 3, I didn't own. I owned priority number 4, but I run the business. So I knew I needed to have weekly coaching time blocks to ensure that the people who owned the top 3 priorities were being successful. So just the purpose of the GPS is to help each person know what goes on their 411, the piece of the business they own, so they're clear on what they're focusing on for the year, so they know what they need to focus on this month, so they know what they need to focus on this week. Great question. Okay. I'm looking through the rest of the stuff. You guys are being very interactive. That's wonderful. Okay, we've established the goal. It's specific, it's measurable, it's simple. At a bare minimum, it is directional. We then identify the priorities. We list them in order of priority. And then whoever owns, if Kaylin owns priority number 1, it's Kaylin's job to make sure that this is written in a way that's simple, specific, spelling's not my one thing, deal with it, measurable. And if at a bare minimum, directional. It's Tony's job to make sure that it's written in a way that is simple, specific, measurable, and if bare minimum, make it directional. You get the point? Whoever owns the priority gets to write it. Now, once we've established these, what is the next step, folks? I bet you can come up with this. Put it in the questions box. The strategies, that's right. So when we need to identify the strategies for priority 1, whose job is that? It's Kaylin's job. This is a mistake we see many leaders make is they get in their office and they go, well, I think the goal is this, and I think these are the priorities, and I think these are our strategies, and then they hand it to their team and say, go forth and prosper, be productive. Yet they have no ownership in it. They have no DNA. Their input was not heard. So this is when I would look to Kaylin and say, Kaylin, sit down with your team, and your team needs to come up with the specific strategies they need to accomplish to achieve this priority. Tony, get with your team and come up with the specific strategies you need to focus on to achieve your priority. And how do you do that? Sticky notes. Team, if our priority is retention, what are the things that we need to drive retention for? What do we need to do? Go. And each person writes things down on sticky notes individually. You then crowdsource it. You find the categories, you rank them, and all of a sudden you have strategies from the group. And then once they are there, we assign an owner to each one of them so that every single person on your team knows what piece of the pie they own, and it is the job of that owner to write it in a way that is specific, measurable, simple, and at a bare minimum, directional. Are you seeing the thread that we keep pulling through this? It's just repeating the process over and over again. What questions do you have? On a scale of 1 to 10, how many of you where 1 is, oh my gosh, I'm more confused than ever before, and 10 is, oh my gosh, I finally get it. Where are you on this process? All right. Awesome. Folks, this is the one thing is the surprisingly simple truth behind extraordinary results. Does simple mean it's easy? It doesn't. It really doesn't. But that's, at least it can be simple. So let's fly up. Let's pull everything we've heard. Let's pull it back and fly up to 10,000 feet. Establish the goal. Invite the insight of your people. And then you as the leader, say where the goal is. Specific, measurable, simple, directional. Then once we know the goal, we can then say, what are the priorities that are going to get us there? Surface all the ideas, rank them in order of priority, assign an owner, and then that person needs to write it in a way so it's specific, measurable, simple, and bare minimum directional. Then that person gets with their team and says, what are all the strategies that we need to focus on to accomplish this priority? They each get all their ideas, they rank them in order of priority, assign an owner, specific, measurable, simple, directional. You update the document, you are done. And once this is, yes, Jeannie.
Would you go back and just cover again specifically what you mean by directional and maybe give an example again?
Sure. So again, for most of you on this call, I don't think the directional is going to apply. So here's an example of a priority that might be directional. Keep customer longer, improve employee performance, develop our leaders. That's not specific. It's not measurable. It's simple. At a bare minimum, I can understand that we need to do the things that keep our customers longer. I can understand that we need to do specific things that'll make our employees more productive. I can understand that we need to focus on developing our leaders. It can help me be appropriate in the moment. It's not ideal, but a more ideal version of that might be increase customer retention by 10% rather than keep customers longer. Instead of having improve employee performance, we'd have adopt a new model for prioritization and accountability. Instead of having develop our leaders, we would have promote current talent exceeding expectations to new roles. It's just the difference is you ask a question like, how will you know if you're successful? How would you know if you were successful developing your leaders? Well, we'd be promoting current talent that's outperforming their role to a new role. How would we know if we were successful keeping our customers longer? Well, we'd increase our customer retention by 10%. So it's that same question that we asked when we wanted to determine the goal. How will you know if you are successful? One question drills it all. I think for most of the people, just knowing your industries, you can get specific. Yeah, when we go inside of some of these big companies and you're working with IT, it's very directional. But I don't think that applies to most of you. Okay.
Jeff, I see another great question here. Is it recommended for a personal GPS and a business GPS?
I would first and foremost ask the question. Most GPSs we see are a business one. A personal GPS can be beneficial if it's a really big goal. If your goal is to work out more, you do not need a GPS for that. That's just a 411. How many times do I need to work out this year? Based on that, how many do I need to work out this month? Based on that, how many do I need to work out this week? Here, let me show you an example. Right here, my number 2 personal priority for the year is to exercise 250 times. At the beginning of this month, I asked, what's the gap? And based on that, I knew I had to exercise 25 times this month to be on track for hitting my goal for the year, which means I have to work out 7 times this week. But I'm way behind. So I don't need a full-blown GPS to tell me to get to the gym. Yet if I want to run an Ironman, it's not just exercise, it's diet, it's sleep, it's stress, it's accountability. Like there's a lot of other things that are layered into a really complex goal. Maybe you want a GPS for that. I can tell you for me personally, I've got a GPS for my business, and my wife and I have a GPS for building wealth. How are we going to increase income? How are we going to decrease spending? And what habits do we need to form that would make us wealthy over the long run? Good question. What else are you seeing, Jeannie?
I'm seeing a really great comment here. Wouldn't it be amazing if our kids could grow up with this thought process being ingrained? All of us are trying to overcome decades of poor habits and thought processes.
Let me show you guys this. This is actually pretty cool. So this happened the other night. So my daughter Daphne is a mini me, and the other night she asked me if I would read her the one thing, and here you go. Here, I'll hold it up to the camera. So every night she's been falling asleep to me reading her the surprisingly simple truth behind extraordinary results. And it's at the point now where I'll ask her to go do something. She'll go, Daddy, my one thing is this. That's a distraction. But what's funny about that is a 6-year-old really actually gets it. Charlie sent me a video of his daughter where he asked her, what would you say to somebody who has multiple things to do? She'd say, and she said something along the lines of, do one at a time. It's like our kids actually get this stuff. It's just somewhere along growing up, we completely forget. And we unconsciously develop habits that lead to us treating everything like it matters equally. Great question. Great question. Okay, so let's, from a high level, let me help you understand how this all flows together. Because how many of you have ever thought, okay, there's goal setting to the now, there's a GPS, there's a 411, there's time blocking, there's a 66-day challenge. How the heck does all this stuff work? How many of you have ever thought that before? If so, put me in the questions box. Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm pulling up a slide that I can show you that will simplify this very quickly for all of you. Boom, 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 boom. Here we go. This will make your life way simpler. Okay, so it starts by going out someday and asking, what do you want your future to look like? And based on that vision, you earn the right to identify where you think you need to be 5 years from now to feel like you're on track for your someday. Once you have that 5-year goal set up, you then figure out what do you need to do this year to be on track for your 5. Once you set your goals for this year, if you have a business or a team, or if the goal is really big and complex, you do a GPS so that you can break it down and assign owners. That then shows you what goes on 411. Just because you have a 1-year goal doesn't mean you have to have a GPS. You could go straight to a 411. But a 411 allows you to break, for you personally, what are your priorities for this year? Based on that, what do you need to do this month? Based on that, what do you need to do this week? When you get clarity on those true 20% priorities for this week, that's what you time block on your digital planner or on your digital calendar and your paper planner. Everything else goes on a to-do list, folks. And this is a huge aha for people. If most of you, if we challenged you to open your digital calendar right now and take a screenshot and send it to us, what we would see is a bunch of meetings with other people, a bunch of reminders of things you don't want to forget to do. We would see the 80% stuff. But that's why, for decades, Gary Keller has used a paper planner. It's why we created the One Thing Planner, because you needed a place to park your priorities first. The things that you identify on your 411 go here first, where the slate is clean, so you're not distracted by all the other stuff. You place the big rocks in the stream first, so that when the water hits it, it goes around. Then once you have clarity on what your priorities are and you've said, hey, I'm going to do it on these days, you open your digital calendar and you see all the stuff that's already scheduled, and suddenly you see priorities and you see distractions, and you do not get them confused. And then it's just a matter of what are you going to say yes to and what are you going to say no to. Most people, when you plan your time, you open your digital calendar sometime between Friday and Monday morning, you see all the stuff that's scheduled, and you schedule everything else in the time that remains. Folks, that's treating everything like it matters equally. And it's not your fault. You were never taught a better way. You're learning it right now. Identify your one thing. The GPS tells you the pieces you own. The 411 allows you to break it down so that you know what it is this week. Identify your one thing. You time block your one thing. And when you show up for that time block, you protect your time block. Okay. We've got 10 minutes left. This is time for Q&A. While we do it, I'm just going to show you. So this was part 1 of the series. We showed you how to create the GPS. The next one is where the rubber really meets the road. This is when we show you not only how to create a great GPS, or a great 411, we're going to show you how to hold weekly 411s with your team. That will be on December 4th. It's a Wednesday, 3 p.m. Central. Register now. theonething.com. That's with the number 1/client 411. I would go ahead and open a browser really quickly. Go to theonething.com/client 411 and register right now. And I would start asking the question, who else do you know in your world that probably needs to come to this as well? And I would bring them. So I'm going to look at questions and we'll go from there. Katie said saying no to something is just saying yes to your priority. Yeah, and it's tough to say no because oftentimes we're not clear on what we're saying yes to. But when we're really clear what we're saying yes to, saying no becomes a lot easier. I will share, last week, Friday mornings is when I do my planning time block, and I was asking a bunch of reflection questions, and I noticed that I had a bunch of time blocks for lead gen on my calendar that I did not protect. And I asked why, and I searched for that answer. And the answer was, in that moment, I didn't understand the value of lead generating. I was more entertained by the other things that were happening around me. It was more exciting to deal with those shiny things versus the monotonous lead generation. Anybody able to identify with that? So I did a really interesting exercise. I looked at my 411. As you noticed, I can see exactly how much time I've lead generated year to date. I also know exactly how much revenue I've brought in year to date as a result of investing that time. So I did something really interesting. I divided the amount of money that I brought in divided by the number of hours it took to generate that income and understood the value of my time. The number blew my mind. Shocked me. My time when I lead generate is worth $2,500 an hour. And it made me look at my calendar and say, what else even comes close to competing with that? And the answer was nothing. Interesting. I've had a lot of conviction to do my lead gen this week. Awesome. Thanks, Rebecca. Scott, is there a possibility after creating your GPS that you have to reassess, perhaps only with the strategies? Absolutely, Scott. Things change. And the GPS is, look, we're doing it in a digital format. This is not a document that we climbed up a mountaintop with Charlton Heston, etched it in stone, carried the tablets down and said, thou shalt follow this plan. That's not what a GPS is. It's a flexible, living, breathing document. But this is where we hit. This gives people clarity on where the organization is going. It gives people clarity on what piece of the pie they own. Number 3, when priorities change, all you got to do is go, I'm hearing you say this is a new priority. Where does it fit? Is it the new number 1? Is it the new number 2? Is it the new number 3? Is it the new number 4? Based on that, what does that mean for everything else below it? It facilitates that conversation. It ensures that you don't say yes to everything, that you understand if you're going to shift focus and say yes to something new, it means that you are actually saying no to other things. That's how it helps you act when priorities change. And when your one thing isn't somebody else's one thing, perfect example. Kaylin's one thing, priority 1. Tony's one thing, priority 2. I can tell you they need each other to succeed. What it does is that when Kaylin comes to Tony and says, Tony, I need you on this, and Tony understands that's not his one thing, he now is able to say, Kaylin, I know that's your one thing, and my one thing is this. So let's talk about expectations. Let's talk about our timelines. And that's where negotiation begins to happen. Instead of just people stopping by and saying, hey, do you got a minute? And people blindly going, yes, I got a minute for you, because they don't actually have an easy way to say no. They look, and then they have a conversation around it. Great question. Thank you, Chris. How do you get the 411 version? Luke asked. Luke, let me show you. you go to theonething.com and you click on free stuff. And here's the 411 XL, here's the 411 Word. The GPS is right here. And if you guys want a training course on this, if you go to the training page, I will show you. Free trainings are these basic courses. So we've got one on the 411. I believe we just launched one on the GPS. And under foundational courses, we have far more robust courses on how to fill out 411s and hold them with your teams, as well as a GPS one. That's all part of our membership platform. Perfect. Tammy, can you show the GPS questions again on the screen? Oh yeah, you betcha. Take a little screenshot of that. There you go. Dean says, I'm blown away. You've taken something which has seemed so complicated and reduced it to something so very simple. Thank you, Dean. I appreciate that. And honestly, man, we're just practice leaders. Jay said to me, we're not thought leaders, we're practice leaders. We live this every single day. And because we are so committed to following this path of mastery, every single time we stand in front of a group of people and teach this, we see what the questions are that come up, and we've learned every single time how to deliver the message in a way that makes a little bit more sense to you. So you have the same opportunity. So thank you. Scott, the 10 commandments. Yeah, that's right. Troy, can you elaborate on best practices for holding yourself accountable to the GPS and the 411? The best practice for holding yourself accountable to the GPS is the 411, because the GPS is high level in terms of what we're accomplishing this year and the order of priority of all those things. But the 411 is what helps you have the relationship with your goals. This helps you set the goal and understand what piece each person is owning and have a model for when priorities change or when there's not alignment. But a 411 allows every single person to say, okay, I know what I own for the year. Now, what are the handful of things I got to do this month to be on track for the year? Okay, I got that. What are the handful of things I got to do this week to be on track for the month? Okay, I got that. And then they run. And that's what the next webinar is going to be all about, which December 4th, 3 p.m. Central, theonething.com/client411. Make sure you sign up for that right now. Eric asked about the 2021 Thing planners. We just got word they will be in the office on November 28th, and they will be shipping out early December. So we will absolutely have them in your hands before the holidays. If you are interested in looking at the One Thing Planner, you go to that onething.com website. There's a tab that says shop. You can get it right there. They're on pre-order as we speak. All right, folks, it's a few minutes before the top of the hour, so let's wrap this up, give you time to get to your next time block. We really appreciate you investing your time, and we hope to see you on December 4th for how to create a great 411. Thanks all.